I have a daughter particularly who's dyslexic, who her ability to listen to content is far superior than her ability to read at the moment. So she craves deep, intricate stories, and she can get that in audio form. And while I do love to read to her, and I do, I could never satiate her appetite for stories. So we found podcasts as the perfect medium.
Hi, everyone. I'm your host, Dr. Shafer of Talks with Dr. Shafer. I'm so glad you're here. I'm a physician, mom, life coach, musician, author, publisher, and I'm passionate about using storytelling as a tool to help you reclaim your story and build your most beautiful future. Thanks again for being here today, storytellers. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the show so that you don't miss any of our upcoming inspiring episodes with amazing guests who have reclaimed their stories and are building an amazing future for themselves and making a big difference in the world while doing so. Now, today we have two very inspiring guests who are sharing a plethora of very important stories through their work as children's podcast app developers. Jessica Ray and Rachel Lacy are the co-founders of KidsPod, a podcast app for kids where you can find all of their favorite podcasts in one place, helping families connect kids to inspiring and empowering kids podcasts in a safe and efficient way. Jessica and Rachel, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having us. I'm glad we
Thank
got to
you.
connect at Podcast Movement and make this happen.
I'm excited to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. And Rachel, we didn't meet at Podcast Movement, but it was so amazing. I got to go and see Jessica. She was on this amazing panel talking about something near and dear to our heart, which is children's podcasts. And it was such a enriching experience. Podcast Movement was really wonderful in general, but I think my favorite experiences were being a part of the children's focused podcasting community because it's such an amazing community. What drew both of you to becoming such an integral part of this community?
That's a good question. And something I never would have dreamed saying would happen like 4 or 5 years ago. Rachel's similar is very, Rachel's story is very similar to mine in that we're coming at this just as moms. We both fell in love with listening to kids' podcasts as a family. I'm really not an early adopter to anything, but we were to kids' podcasts. We were living in Japan at the time, and my youngest was 4 months old. And all of a sudden, I'm in a foreign country and I can't listen to NPR in my car. This was 2017. And so I heard about Guy Raz's new show, Wow in the World, while I was listening to podcasts for the first time. I didn't even really listen to podcasts before we moved overseas. And so we started to listen to Wow in the World with our kids when we were in the car or on the train in Japan. And it just became this go-to parenting hack for us. It was guilt-free screen time, really. Anytime I wanted to hand over my phone or the tablet or turn on the TV, I found that I could just turn on a podcast and it would accomplish the same exact thing, entertain my child in a safe way, but without any of the negative consequences. No, what I call screen time monster after you turn the show off or things like that. And so that snowballed. They just became such an integral part of our routine. Fast forward a couple years, my kids are a little older. They do have access to the tablet every now and then. They're doing things on their own. And the one thing they couldn't do on their own was listen to a podcast. And it's the one thing I wanted them to be doing with a device. They were also on a school bus. Kids were taking Switches and tablets and playing Minecraft. And I was like, oh my gosh, if only there was a way they could listen on their own. It was also just incredibly time consuming as a parent at that time. And I still think this is a problem today, is that access and discoverability is really poor in the kids space. You can go on Apple, you can go on Spotify, but if you don't know what you're looking for, it's really hard to start digging into the kid podcast genre and to find not only a quality podcast, but something your kid is actually interested in, right? Because not every kid podcast is for every kid. So Yeah, this idea just really sparked and I couldn't let go of it and realized I was more entrepreneurial in spirit than I thought. And we just started down the road and it's been a long and windy roller coastery road, but we're really proud of where we're at and where the app is today.
I'm so
Yeah.
glad that you started on that journey. And as we know, we're always in the podcasting world developing and improving. Rachel,
Mhm.
how did you come to this place? For one, how did you and Jess meet? And then when did you come into this process of building this app to help improve access to children's podcasts?
Yeah. So I will start with similar story to Jess. Young kids in the middle of COVID, we find ourselves at home, um, looking for things to do. So my husband had heard a advertisement for Wow in the World, same podcast on NPR. I'm a big podcast listener. My husband's a big podcast listener. So at lunch one day with our young kids, I think the oldest was 9, maybe, at the time during COVID, he turned it on. And we found ourselves establishing a routine. We listened every day. And I experienced that magical moment where we're all engaged in the same medium and we're looking at each other and we're able to talk to each other. We're learning, we're entertained. I mean, it was just this magical moment and it hit me hard and we fell in love deep. So we started with Wow in the World and then we jumped from there. And I have two neurodivergent kids who have attached to audio stronger than I think most kids would. I have a daughter particularly who's dyslexic, who her ability to listen to content is far superior than her ability to read at the moment. So she craves deep, intricate stories, and she can get that in audio form. And while I do love to read to her, and I do, I could never satiate her appetite for stories. So we found podcasts as the perfect medium. She does audiobooks, but she also does podcasts because they're the perfect length in the morning or after school or in the car. And we found that they were a perfect fit for our family and supplementing our learning needs, especially during COVID. And then we never let go. We just continued even past COVID. Once they got back into school and back into our normal routine, we just kept with it. And we the story of Jess and I meeting, so we were very passionate about it. So I had a lot of friends that I was sharing, do you guys know about this? Do you guys know that there are podcasts out there and they're free and your kids will love them? I guarantee your kids will love them. So I had a lot of friends asking me for recommendations because they didn't know what to listen to and where to start. So I started an Instagram page and just started sharing some of our favorite shows. I was doing a lot of the legwork to find and review good shows. So I wanted to just share. And Jess reached out and said, do you want to partner? Do you want to jump on? We're making an app. And the idea she shared, I was on board. I was like, yes, if you can put my child in charge of finding shows, discovering shows that I don't have to do that work, but as a parent, I know it's safe, that they can explore to their heart's content in this app and I don't have to worry about them falling into true crime or inappropriate content, that I can just let them listen. Yes. So I jumped on board. That was like 2 years ago, I think, at this point. And now we have the app and we're rolling.
I
Yeah.
so resonate with that. It makes me think of, now, especially before it used to be, for example, if you let your kids watch some things on Netflix. And let's say they have a show that they really like. So my daughter really loves Young Sheldon. And so
Mhm.
that's a show she really likes, but it's only on the adult Netflix. It's not on the kids'
Yeah.
Netflix.
Right.
So the show itself is quite wholesome and fun. There are some adult themes woven in there, but done so that for a 10-year-old like my daughter, it's okay, especially when watched together.
Mm-hmm.
But because it's on adult Netflix, you're going to get commercials and things that are just going to come in, because now, unless you buy premium, right, most people on their streaming, even on Disney, they're going to be getting some ads. And it's really not for certain that those ads even are going to be age appropriate. So being
Right.
able to make sure that you have not just a good podcast, the podcast is safe, but you have created an overarching environment where they can actually go and look for the next thing. And if there is an ad for another podcast, that it's still going to meet the criteria for safety for your child. That is a huge win as a parent, that you're not feeling like you have to watch like a hawk and think, okay, I'm going to have to push the button when that scary thing comes on because I don't want any nightmares tonight and I don't want them to see that.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that audio is even more um, concerning because it's such an intimate medium. Because especially if they have it in their ears on a headphones or something, you don't know what they're listening to. And
Yeah.
so you need to know that it's appropriate and safe versus a visual where you can kind of see it. You know what I mean? So it's paramount. Safety is paramount for us.
Yeah. I think when one of our beginning goals with the app was, we both have 3 kids. We're both in this new parenting era where there's technology we don't understand. We thought we did. We grew up with the internet, kind of. And so it's like we should know these things, but I'm already at a loss, even just trying to, point my kids to the YouTube channels they want to listen, they want to watch, and that are educational and great. And I totally approve. But then how do you keep them on those channels? And same with Minecraft. The list is endless of things that we don't really know how to control for our kids, or at least create those safe environments. And so really from day one, it was like, this is an app. This is the guilt-free screen time. This is something you can always say yes to. Like the goal was to have, if your kid has an iPhone or an iPad or whatever, they have time limits on all their apps, whatever, they should have access to educational podcasts any time of the day. Like that is where there is no limit. And so I love that feeling of being able to say yes, because I feel like we're saying no all day long with kids and technology. And you don't want it to be a negative interaction because technology is part of their world. It's going to be their job. It's going to be whatever. And it's what they relate to and how they connect to friends and everything. So I was having a really hard time as a parent putting everything in a bad bucket or, good bucket. And I just wanted to feel good about something, really, at the end of the day.
Yeah, that seems so much more realistic the way you framed it as well, that, technology is a part of all of our lives. And when you empower children to use a tool to help them find something that is good for them, and then you as a family, as you both expressed, we experienced this together. We could talk about it. We could share it. And then you reinforce, oh, what an interesting choice you made. I loved that theme. I walked by and I heard it, right? Or if it's something that you're listening to as a family, as they get older, as you said, it's the headphones. So at least as a parent that they're getting really interesting and thought-provoking and safe content in their ears. One thing that you were talking about earlier, Rachel, with regards to having a child who is neurodivergent, let's say they have ADHD or they have autism, and sometimes sound or visual cues can be overwhelming, especially in combination, right? And I think it's an interesting concept to consider if you have children who are neurodivergent or who are simply sensitive, even if they haven't been diagnosed as being neurodivergent, but you notice that they're sensitive to abrupt sounds and things like that, to again have access to a medium that's less overwhelming and allows them to hone in on their audio sensation rather than having to have these multiple competing sensations coming in for their brains to process. And I wonder if that also is helpful if a child is neurodivergent to get access to storytelling and to information, but in a less overwhelming, overstimulating manner.
Yeah, I have found that to be true. I talked about my daughter who's dyslexic, but I also have a son who's autistic. And he, what I have found, because I was curious as he was growing, like how would he interact with podcasts? Um, he's not conversational, so it's not that he's not verbal. So I was kind of like, his language skills, like what is he taking in? What is he hearing? But what I have found, because his sister listens constantly, they're always on in our house, he's picking them up. And what I have found is there's multiple types of podcasts. My daughter mostly listens to stories, so that's mostly what we listen to is stories. And he is getting that receptive language. He's getting that like reinforced in the car, at home when we have a snack and it's playing. He is hearing it and it's internalizing it because he will repeat some of the things he hears. He echoes a lot of what he hears. So it's really additive and helpful for him. The other thing I would say is, speaking of needing a little bit soother, calmer, there are some podcasts that are really loud and really fun, but there's some that are relaxing, and there's some that incorporate a lot of music, and there's some that incorporate a lot of affirmations and meditation. And for both of my neurodivergent kids, school can be stressful. School can be hard because they have to exercise so much more mental load and capacity than typical kids. So when they get home, oftentimes they're a bit fried. And what I've noticed is my daughter will turn on a story, her own self-advocacy. She knows what she needs, and that's to get lost in a story. And I think that is, it's wildly powerful to me because like, I don't have time to sit down and read her a story after school. We're busy. She doesn't quite have the capacity to read at the level she wants. So she turns on a story, she cuddles up on her bed for 20 minutes, and she just relaxes. And like, that is the most self-care, like self-soothing situation she can engage in. Emotionally, she's resetting. She can access that because she can access this app through podcasts. She can get there from KidsPod. So I think whether it's meditations or stories or information, like however you feel drawn, that can be emotionally regulating. It can help add language and vocabulary for these kids that need additional reinforcement. They just need, X times more input for it to store. Or there's just like so many wild benefits that I didn't even anticipate going into it. I did it mostly at the beginning, we did it mostly just as entertainment. But as we've gone along, I've realized there are really great academic and social emotional learning benefits to these shows that we find daily. I mean, truly daily, we benefit from them.
I would second that. I think while my kids aren't on the neurodiverse scale, when it came to time when they were learning to read, writing more in school, first, second, third grade, their teachers would pull me aside and be like, their vocabulary is insane. Like, what are you doing at home? And I was like, I don't know. I and their ability to like create stories and do this, but I think again, like Rachel said, that the input was just so great and in so many different ways. Like, yes, we read, yes, they tried to read, but they were also, I mean, I am by no means a screen-free parent. They were on Minecraft, they're on Roblox, whatever. But yeah, you could really see, especially in that language development, you could see how they were outpacing their peers a little bit.
Yeah, I think that listening comprehension piece is really key, and this is so beneficial with listening comprehension.
Well, and I think also for people, if they're listening to this episode 10 years from now, I think giving the context too of our children were quite young in their development when they were going through a really big disruptive event,
Yes.
which was COVID.
Yes.
And it was keeping kids out of schools. It was minimizing the amount of conversations they were overhearing because for a long time, a lot of people were stuck. And there also can be other family situations or geographical situations that can keep children's circles smaller than maybe historically they would be. And I love this idea of making sure to give them this consistent exposure to these healthy stories and creativity. And also, there are podcasts where kids are showing other kids how to do things. My daughter has exactly that kind of podcast herself, What's Up Young Authors, where she's interviewing other young authors about how did you do this? How did you write the book? How did you illustrate it? How did you publish it? How did you promote it? How did that feel, right? Getting to the nuts and bolts of things. If you're having limited exposure to other kids and adults and people from all parts of the world for whatever reason, it's such a unique and enriching way to gain that access, to hear those stories, to learn about different things that you can do and open your mind to things you might not have been exposed to yet.
Exactly.
Amen.
Yes, exactly.
I shout this from the rooftops constantly. Recognizing that my kids have lived a very privileged life and that we were living in different countries, we were living in different states. And not only that, but being a part of the military, even though you're in Italy, like your community is made up of people from every state in America, plus, 20, 30 other countries. And so their community was so diverse and in the most beautiful way possible that I and then I saw the benefits of that they understood differences. They didn't have the same biases that maybe I even had as an adult going into these situations. They were much more open to the world. And I want every kid to have that. And it started one of the other ways we used podcasts a lot, especially when we were traveling more. I still do it. My go-to, if we're ever going on a trip or going somewhere new, whether it's an hour away or 15 hours away, I search it in podcasts. I search that location, that place, that language, whatever. And you're able to find episodes or podcasts about that place in a fun way. And it's so great for like lazy ADHD moms like me who don't plan weeks in advance and go to the library and check out the books or whatever. I'm a last minute girl. Okay. So on the way to Pompeii, I could search Pompeii in KidsPod and find, a handful of episodes that we listen to on the way. And then we get there and my kids are asking questions. They understand. They're so much more engaged. And I think it's one of the easiest, most accessible ways for kids, even if you're stuck at home during COVID or you don't have the opportunity to travel, you can travel through podcasts, just like you can through books. You can meet other people, experience other cultures, learn about things that you would never have interaction with if you were to stay in your own little bubble. And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about getting this free public resource that, people like your daughter and other people have passionately created this wonderful content and actually getting people access to it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I was just going to add, I similarly, we just went to New York, and while we were waiting in line for pizza, I popped in a story about the Statue of Liberty. And my daughter learned all about the Statue of Liberty, and then we went, and it was so much more impactful. I mean, it really made a deeper impression. And that's easy. So we're looking for easy tools for our parents. That's what we were really trying to do.
Right. And I think it's unrealistic. And I think, we don't want to shame moms for being busy because honestly, the world has set us up to be overscheduled, overstressed. You all are raising these amazing human beings and starting a company and sharing podcasts with the world and its children. So I think we just have to give you the credit where you deserve it. And there's nothing lazy about this. I think it's really more of a just living in the moment and understanding your resource. And I think there's so much beauty to when you actually start living in the moment instead of kind of over planning things and you say, no, I've got the resource. I think that's something important to teach our kids now, especially with just the way that education is in general changing with AI, with access to online resources. The way we teach children to interact with the world and information is different. Before, you were expected to learn everything, memorize everything. And now it's actually better to learn how to be a critical thinker and how to access your resources rather than just how to memorize and regurgitate information. So learning how to work with a database of podcasts for children is really in line with a skill that we know our kids need to be learning in modern day life.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's another reason why podcasts are a go-to for me is because they're current and they're constantly coming out. So books are great, but you're not, if, with the hurricanes, for example, you're not going to be able to go to the library and find a book about what's going on right this second. But I guarantee if you were to search for it right now, there'd be at least a handful of episodes on what's going on, right? And so I've talked about this before, but when one of the other times we turn to podcasts as parents and as a family is when things are going on that our kids don't understand, when there's questions, when there's things that my husband and I don't know how to explain in a way that will be accessible to them. And that's oftentimes when we just go and search for a podcast that will do it for us. It sounds like it's an easy way out, but honestly, it starts so many good conversations because these masterful, storytellers and content creators, they're experts in this and how to frame things in the proper way and in the proper time for kids of, all ages. But it's really nice to be able to have that easy and free access to experts who know what they're doing. And then, you can jump off from there. And I mean, I know it helped us during COVID, explain COVID to our kids. It helped us during, when the war in Ukraine broke out. It helped us, anything that's going on in the world that they're hearing about. We've been able to turn to podcasts and start a meaningful conversation about it.
We have used it that way for sure to start difficult conversations. I mean, I remember specifically we were living in Texas and it was during around the time of the Uvalde shooting. And that's talking about gun violence and school shootings is extremely difficult. And then talking about it with your kids is terrifying. And I don't always have the right words. I don't know how much to share, how little to share. You just don't know. And I remember we pulled up a podcast and they talked a little bit about gun laws and just kind of like removed a lot of the politics behind it and just kind of spoke straight to the kids. And it helped me as a parent. Like I listened along and I thought, oh, yeah, okay, that's a better place to start. Or like that's a better thing to focus on. And like Jess said, you jump from there. It's just such a really great, I mean, they're free. Like that's what just like they're free resources for parenting. Like that's another benefit that I didn't anticipate, but it's a really great conversation starter for really difficult topics.
And they're targeted towards reaching children where they're at. And like you said,
Yeah.
as adults, we don't always have the right language. It may not be something that we're comfortable with. It may not be something that we're an expert in. And again, it's so important with the wealth of information we have on this planet now as human beings that we are modeling for our children that we are not expected to have all the answers. You're not expected to have all the answers. But what I would love for you to be able to do is know how to find answers and how to be a critical thinker with that information, and also be careful and mindful of what you're exposing yourself to, because it does have an effect on our mindset, our mood, and our relationship with this information. It makes me think of what's happening now. We're in an election year here in the United States, and an experience that my 10-year-old is having is, in class on the schoolyard, they're talking about the candidates. And they're coming with opinions that aren't based on issues, generally speaking. What's being discussed among the kids are these opinions that are more based on emotion and party affiliations. And these kids are too young to have party affiliations that they have, done the research and decided what they want and, what makes sense to them. They are absorbing this information and repeating it with gusto. And so I think, I think it's a good opportunity for us to be really mindful about the information, because if we're turning on the news and we have it on in the same room with our kids, they are receiving information that was not developed for their ears, for their learning ability, for their ability to cope with that information. And we know we live in a quite sensationalized media landscape when it comes to what adults are exposed to on the news. Of course, we can make mindful choices about the news that we access, and some are less less polarized and less sensational than others. But at the end of the day, that's the general feeling and experience of our modern 24-hour-a-day news cycle. And so I think it's a brilliant thing that you brought up, that this isn't just for stories, right? This isn't just for bedtime stories or in the car stories. This is for learning about current events and about really big topics, about psychology, so that kids are armed with this information, and it's created for them often by other kids or by experts in fields, so that they're getting the information in a way that they can really digest it and understand it and take that information and make decisions on their own. Because again, we're trying to raise critical thinkers. We don't want our kids to just go on the schoolyard and just repeat something that they heard that was never really meant for their ears.
Yeah, you know what it makes me think of, Jess, what's that there's a podcast that I love, and that's their entire intention is creating critical thinkers. So they present two experts, one is lying, and one is telling the truth. And as a family, it's common day topics like roller coasters and soccer, and one is just telling lies and the other is truthful. And you kind of have to, you learn the skill of sorting out what is truthful, and you kind of like pick up on the clues of like, oh, he sounded like he just made that up, or the other one's bringing statistics. Like, you learn how to be a critical thinker while they're entertained. Such a valuable skill, like you're saying, in today's day. And there is a free resource that is so fun for kids and families to do together to learn this valuable skill. Do you remember what it's called? I know it used to be Pants on Fire. What's it called?
It's called The Big Fib.
Yes, The Big Fib.
The other
like
one that came to mind that my kids love, and it actually turned into like a game we would play at dinner time, like not even listening to the podcast, but we took the podcast format and would play amongst ourselves. It's called Smash Boom Best.
Yes.
And it's a debate show, but they don't say it's like a debate show. It's they'll pit two things against each other. They have, guests come on and they go through all these funny, silly rounds, and it'll be like, French fries versus pizza, or Spider-Man versus Batman. And they have to make all these arguments in different ways. And then there's a guest judge that's a kid. But the cool thing is that in the midst of it, they're teaching kids like what an ad hominem attack is, and like things that I didn't even know about till I was in college, And so then the kids learn so much. Then when they're arguing amongst themselves, they're like, you can't do that. You're attacking my person and not my argument. Or like, they'll start doing it. And I'm like, where did you kids come from? And, but yeah, we started playing that at the dinner table as like, the kids will come up with a topic. They'll decide who's the judge. And then they'll be like, my husband and I have to be the arguers. And I don't know. It's been really fun. But I was wondering, this is probably not important. I was wondering if the campaigns know how much money they're spending putting attack ads on YouTube that are just going to non-voters, because my kids see the attack ads constantly, more so than I see them, because I don't watch YouTube, but because they're on YouTube, even just like 15, 30 minutes a day, they're seeing like 5 attack ads, and they're like,
that's funny.
Tim Sheehy, John Tester, and we're in a very big Senate contention race, and so it's funny how much they know more than I do.
It's interesting because, they're exposed to this kind of sensationalism and the emotional based approach. And then they have an emotional response because, right, they're young, mirror neurons. We know that we as a species, we mirror. And that's just setting them up for something. And it's interesting because I think when we were growing up, someone might have said, if they overheard our conversation, if we were parents back then, they might have said, oh, they got to learn sometime. And I think the brilliant part about raising children when we're raising children is now we know exactly they need to learn. They need to learn how to be critical thinkers and to not use emotions to win a conversation, but rather to connect with people and to trade ideas, and then to really form that habit of being able to debate and have a conversation and not try to take control of the other person, but just be an observer. And when it's important and when it's appropriate, be a participant of the conversation and learning your role in that, and not just letting your emotions take over and say, no, I've got to jump in. I've got to win this. I think that's a really important thing to teach children.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I wish all our leaders knew that type of stuff. Like, this is valuable stuff. What you were saying reminded me that another really, and then we touched on this a little bit, but another really great benefit is there are dozens of social emotional learning podcasts, whether they're in story form or like meditation affirmations. So helping kids talk about emotions. There's some that are geared towards a little bit older that, help kids break down what is anxiety? What is depression? What does it mean to belong? And it breaks down all of these emotions, and then it helps kids, whatever development level they're at, work through and learn the valuable skills of emotional regulation and social interactions and being able to label your emotions, like such valuable stuff. But like we've talked about, in a format that is easily digestible for kids, whether it's in a story or to music or whatever format, but it's very, very impactful and helpful. I know we have a lot of therapists and teachers who use these type of podcasts in classrooms or different settings to help kids learn emotional regulation. It's very helpful.
I wanted to know if you collaborate with schools or libraries to try to bridge that gap. And as you've mentioned before, kind of increase awareness, because there can be all these wonderful podcasts for kids out there that are of various different natures and with different topics. But if you don't know that they're there, you're not going to find them and you're not going to benefit from them.
Yeah. Awareness. Luckily, I feel like just society's gaining more awareness. Thankfully, I feel like we're almost to like a tipping point. I think it was not this year's podcast of it, but last year's they announced the Disney Frozen podcast, and Rachel and I were both like, okay, if Disney's making a Frozen podcast, like, then most people are going to know about it. Like, this is awesome. I don't know if it really helped tip the scales, but I think it may have. Yes, we are trying to get in as many schools and mental health institutions as possible. We have one hospital that we've been working with and training their child life specialist, which isn't a role I don't know if many are familiar with, but for kids who are admitted into a hospital, whether for cancer treatment or other long-term treatment, they usually are assigned a child life specialist, who is someone who walks with them through that journey of being in the hospital and not only manages their care, but preps them and helps them cope with their care, whether it's just like, okay, we got to do this test and here's how we're going to get through it, or really advocating for them as well. And we've been helping them, training them on how they can sub audio in instead of always relying on a screen, instead of always relying on a video game or a show or something. And you can imagine for a child that's in the hospital for any length of time, like, what it initially is like a coping mechanism, like, oh, this is so stressful. Like, here, I know you can't do anything else, but here you can watch your favorite show. Relying on that too much becomes a hindrance to their recovery and their health. And we know the negative consequences that are attached to that. So anytime we can sub in audio or something slightly more beneficial, it's a win, right? And so whether it's, that they can listen to a podcast rather than watching a show while they're having some sort of procedure done or test done. If they're getting MRI, they can listen to a show, things like this, and even learn about what's happening to them. I mean, they can find episodes or there's a whole audio drama about kids in the cancer wing of a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they can find people that are going through the same thing and relate to. Even one thing you wouldn't think about is they can even access their spiritual life through that. There are Christian podcasts, there are Muslim podcasts. I mean, there's everything. When you're outside of your routine and you don't have access to like going to church, seeing your people, going through those, reaffirming traditions, you can still have access to that in another way. And so we're still working on the tech side of getting it more accessible to libraries and schools, but right now I want to let everyone know we do offer free subscriptions to any educator through our website. And if you're a therapist or someone else who works with children, just give us an email, contact us through our website. We would love to give, I mean, the KidsPod app is free. The subscription is for extra features that make it a little bit more fun and convenient. But we would love to get that into anybody's hands who's helping children navigate, challenging circumstances or, I mean, well, life right now is challenging. So really.
We're also looking for partnerships. I mean, we've had some contacts with some foster care. We know there's a lot of homeschool curriculums that this would fit beautifully with. We're hoping to work with other kind of like home-based curriculums that this can easily plug into. So there's a plenty of opportunities, and we're kind of looking for every possible opportunity to get it out into people's homes.
I just love it so much. And I was so excited at Podcast Movement when Jess and I met and I became aware because I wasn't aware of the app before. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is so brilliant because as someone who even produced a children's podcast, it can be hard to find the content that you're looking for to connect with other podcasters and to find the shows you want. So it's just so brilliant. And to the point, as a neurologist, who I used to round in the hospital, and as a neurologist, a lot of the patients that I would take care of were in that moment, or maybe even in perpetuity, they were in a different state of consciousness than we are right now having this conversation, right? They may have that temporarily and they're on medications that are keeping them there so that they can rest and recover after a trauma, or they may be in a chronic state of altered consciousness. And to have a different option other than the TV on all the time, that again is having game shows and news and things that are all okay for the right moment, but that person doesn't even have the agency to decide that they're going to bombard their nervous system with all of these sounds and these messages. I do love this idea of choosing, instead of always to have the top 40 radio on or the TV on, choosing something different, like an affirming podcast, because we know what we feed our brains has a big impact on recovery and our experience of the world. And it's a beautiful thing that you brought up. And I am really excited to do my best to also pass this along to hospital systems and such so that they can consider, especially in children's hospitals, involving your application in how they are going about making sure that children feel connected and that they're still having agency over what they're experiencing. I just think that's so beautiful.
When we started working with, it's Children's Hospital of Colorado, when we started working with them, I was just, so they had ideas that I didn't even think of. Like, they were like, oh my gosh, this would be perfect for our mental health intake patients, where they often can't give them anything out of safety concerns, but they could maybe give them a device that has pre-selected safe podcasts that, Rachel could help curate, we could help curate, but that could help them through that time when otherwise they're just sitting there scared and alone. And, just the thought that we could maybe help in that is amazing. And so I'm really excited to hopefully, keep pushing this out, getting more people aware, because I think the possibilities kind of are endless, and every family, every kid uses podcasts for different reasons, different routines, different scenarios. And but I just think it's one of the most important public goods that are out there right now that everyone should be aware of.
I will say over and over and over that my goal is to make podcasts for kids as ubiquitous as YouTube is for kids. Like, I want them to think of it as quickly as they think of YouTube, like, even for my daughter had a school project and she had to research Beethoven. And the first thing she did was pull up KidsPod and type in Beethoven. And she was able to listen to 4 or 5 different podcasts and learned in her own way at her own leading, like she was in charge of it. She did it. I want that to be something that all kids have access to and can think about because they are so wildly beneficial for everyone. And I will say, I have some friends who I've talked to about podcasting. They'll be like, "Oh, we tried it. It wasn't for us." Like, "Oh, my kid didn't like it." If you think that, you tried one podcast and it wasn't for you or your kid didn't resonate with it, try again. Keep trying because there is a podcast for every kid. I am 1,000% convinced of it. There is a podcast on every subject, every genre, every type, loud, quiet, soft, like any subject you're interested in. There is a show. So just keep trying. Keep trying. Don't just give up after one
Yeah,
or two
it would
tries.
be like, your kid tries one chapter book, their first chapter book, and they're like, "Oh, I don't like this," and you just never try again. Like, that would be insane. Of course, you're gonna like introduce them to more and more. And it is still an activity. I mean, there are kids like Rachel's daughter that will go to podcasts that they just really attach themselves to it. For a lot of families, it's still going to be a parent-led activity, especially at first. It's going to take the parent to be like, "Hey, let's listen to a podcast instead," or "This would be a great time to listen to a podcast," or especially in the car. Like if we're getting in the car and your kids just are used to having their tablet, they're not going to choose the podcast over the show they have downloaded or the video game, at first. Maybe they will eventually. But it is still on us as a society, as parents, to like introduce these healthier options and keep pushing a little bit until, it really is part of our routine and the kids start, really gravitating to it as well.
I would also add just a couple of ideas of where and when to plug it in. The car is the most obvious answer because you're all stuck together. And my kids will often fight over music, as much as I love music, and we love music, but they'll often fight. So if I turn on a podcast, often without them even asking, I just turn it on. And then they can't help but listen. It happens over and over where I just turn it on and they end up listening because you can't help it. It sucks you in. The other place that we use it, well, I would say in the car, to from school, to and from activities, road trips is also a really great time to use it. The other time that I really love using it is in the morning. I have found that if one of my children has a really hard time getting out of bed, if I turn on a story, she will like perk right up. She cannot help but get sucked into the story. So I will just turn a little story on her iPad and leave it in the hall, and then it'll motivate her to get going. So morning, car rides, bedtime is a really great time because it helps calm them down, unwind. The other place that we use it a lot is in restaurants. And I'm not ever going to shame a parent ever for giving a tablet. Like I've been there, I've done it. We use screens too. But sometimes I will use a story instead, and I will let my daughter listen to a story while we're waiting for the food. And I love it because her eyes are up. She's looking at the world around her. She's still observing the world around her while she's engaged in a story in her mind. It just helps her wait a little bit longer when impulse control or waiting is hard. It's a
Didn't
really
you
great
use it
resource
at
for that.
Disneyland a lot too?
I love
Waiting
that.
in lines.
Yes, we used it at we used it at Disney. I would let her listen to a story while we're waiting in line. Or there are times where my daughter got overstimulated. Disney is amazing, but it's overstimulating. And so
Yeah.
sometimes she just needed to chill and get lost in a story for just a minute. And it just helps reset her emotional kind of status quo. And then she's ready to go again. There's so many points of access that you can bring it into their lives. That's why it's so great to just have it on your phone. It's just an app on your phone that you can just use for 20 minutes here or there whenever your kid needs it.
I love that. And I also want to say, just from a longevity of your device standpoint,
Yeah.
I think we all have had those moments. And I really tried to limit use of my smartphone in the car or at dinner just because what I found, especially with my youngest child who's 5, if we did it once, forever and ever, that's what we do. Like we had a
Right.
really hard time breaking out of patterns. So for me, if I'm going to do something with him, I have to be willing to commit to that. So
That's true.
giving him my phone to look at for him, it's not something I want to do because I know how that will affect him and have a really hard time with wanting to negotiate and kind of strong arm in the future. So knowing your child, one, but another reason why I never wanted to give him my phone was because I didn't want the phone to be dropped and broken, right?
Yeah,
And if it's a
true.
podcast, you can give them
Mhm.
headphones. They can be safe. They don't have to have a wire. They can be Bluetooth headphones. So that's safer in the car. That's safer depending
Mhm.
upon what activity they're doing for them than having wires, and maybe more comfortable than earbuds. So you've got their headphones on, you control the device is safe, but they're also, like you're saying, having access to the information and maybe soothing, maybe it's an
Mhm.
affirmation, maybe it's a meditation. It's you're helping to model that regulation for them. You're being a part of it. And I
Yeah.
wanted to also say something I loved about this idea of maybe starting with an interactive podcast, like the one that you discussed that you had modeled
Mhm.
around the dinner table as an introduction to podcasts, especially for
Mhm.
younger listeners.
Yes.
So that then as they get older and they're more interested in the informational or the storytelling, and they're not reliant on the imagery as they once were when they were only potentially accustomed to books or movies. Now they're used to it, but you got them hooked by making sure that it was an engaging family activity. And I love.
So, Rachel and I are nearing 40. We're kind of in this older phase of parenting right now. Like, well, Rachel's youngest, he's 5, yes? 6? He's 6. My youngest is
6.
8. So when we started this, we were very much in still like the toddler phase. And it's been interesting as we've kind of grown up as moms and and our kids have grown up, how we use it differently. And then to see the new generation of baby and toddler moms, they're already clued in because they've been listening to podcasts. Like I started listening to podcasts the same time my kids did. That's how it worked for us. But they've grown up with it. They may be in their mid late 20s, early 30s. They already know audio is an option and they know audio is good for their kids. And so now I feel like we've just in the last 6 months have added a handful of like baby podcasts for like infants where it's even
Mhm.
using the science around, infant development stuff to really, be that first introduction to words and babbling and whatever, music. There's a great toddler kind of preschool music education show called Noodle Loaf, where it's basically like the equivalent of paying for the priciest like little mommy and me or parent and me, music class for toddlers, but you can do it in your living room with your child and it's free. And so there's so many different types of podcasts out there. Whatever you're looking for, I mean, there's a toothbrushing podcast. There's a few of them. If your child has trouble brushing their teeth, there's 2-minute funny little podcasts that you can put on to distract them while you're brushing their teeth. Like I literally, anytime I was struggling with something, there was a behavior that we needed to correct, there was something, that our child didn't like doing, I could usually always find a podcast to help with that situation. um, it just, yeah, from brushing your teeth to like tween hygiene, there's something for every kid.
That's a
Yes.
great to point out that podcasts don't have to be passive, and to think about that time with your toddler, with your young child, or at the dinner table again with these interesting debates and mysteries and things that you're solving together. But also with a young child, like we said earlier, we're not experts on everything, and we want to model that it's okay to bring in
Mhm.
reinforcements, right? I don't necessarily play the flute, so I can find an excellent music program and play it, and we can learn that. Or maybe I'm just a new mom and I've never done this before, and we have all this time at home alone. We can't get to mommy and me, or we can't go every day, and I'm feeling kind of lost and unsupported. It's a way to call in reinforcements and maybe pick up some hints and hacks for you to work on connecting with your children and helping be such a big part of their learning journey, because it's something we're going to be doing our entire lives. And this is a tool to use to set them off on the right path.
I would just add, speaking of connecting, I have found that listening to stories together as a family is one of the most beautiful ways to connect. One of my favorite things to do, even with my kid who's now a teenager, because we started when he was younger, one of our favorite things to do is snuggle up on the couch, especially in October, because there's so many fun kind of spooky podcasts. We love to snuggle up on the couch, turn off the lights, and just turn on, a spooky, quote unquote, because it's not that spooky, but a spooky story, and just connect together. I mean, my kids will request it every year because we're snuggling, we're looking at each other, we're, suspense together, but instead of looking at a screen, which, don't get me wrong, we watch shows too, but there's something really special about being able to look at each other. It feels almost nostalgic, like we're listening to old time radio. And there's just something really magical about it. And that connection piece, I think, is really key. That I will just add, as an avid podcast listener, several of the stories are really good. Like, I am into them just as much as my kids are into them, especially the serial shows that are continuation that go on and on and on. And I'm just as into them as they are. And it's something that we connect on together.
I love this idea that we can expose our children to this art of storytelling, of just really getting lost in the story and not having these other distractors that often come in, or even just processing issues, right? When we're reading,
Yep.
we're processing, we're not just hearing.
Yes.
Or when we're watching a movie, we're seeing, we're hearing music, we're hearing a lot of things at one point in time. And so allowing them to process that differently. And I think a very happy product of being exposed to beautiful storytelling young is that they are learning how to tell their own stories, and they're seeing how important a part of being the author of their own stories in life is. So then they can start to tape their own podcasts, and they can go to KidsPod and say, hey, how do I get my podcast on KidsPod?
Absolutely.
I
Yes.
have a question for you as a neurologist, because I've asked another neurologist this and he didn't know. We've often, we have suspected for a long time that, kids' brains work differently while they're listening versus while they're watching something. So I think there's some, studies to that effect, that like it's an active activity as listening, because you're creating the imagery, you're imagining the things. So what I've found anecdotally with my own kids is if I let them watch a 20-minute show, it takes them 20, 30 minutes to start a different activity after that. Because they're just kind of, their brains have been passive for 20 minutes. And so it takes them a while to react. That's when they're like, oh, can't we just watch another one? Like, oh, I'm bored, the screen time monster, I call it. But if I turn on a podcast, half the time they're not even finishing it, because then they're starting to go and play. Or if I put on a story while they're playing, maybe, one of my boys is homesick from school. They don't like playing by themselves. They wish their brother was there or something, or I can't play with them. If I put on a story, they'll get lost in the story. They'll get lost in playing, because it can be a multitasking activity. And so they'll play way longer than they would have if I had just sat them down with a bucket of Legos and said, have at it. And so I wonder, from your perspective or what you know, if that's like unique to my kids, or if that's something that other families would see as well.
Absolutely. It's not unique. Our kids are all definitely unique, but absolutely, when we hear something, we have a different relationship to that information than when we see it. And even just think about, okay, why would our brains be wired that way? Well, when we hear something, what's the next thing many people do?
Yeah, responding.
They respond. They respond. And so we are hardwired when we hear a conversation or a story to respond to it. So, and we know actually all of us, almost all of us, need to work on being better listeners, right? So there's a twofold, I think, benefit from listening to podcasts is you're learning to listen without responding. which is really important. But you're also really tapping into that part of your brain's natural wiring, which is that we do often work on the response. And so that's opening up creative responses to what they're hearing. And another point, I think, to your point is that we can only have so much attention at one point in time. And so if we are listening to something and watching something on the TV, that's taking all of our computational power. We can't multitask. You can't watch TV and do something else. But we can listen to something and walk around. We can listen to something and move our toys. It's not going to get all of our attention, but we're tapping into a different amount of our brain power and a different part of our brain power. And because we are wired to be readily able to respond, we're just in a different frame of mind. It's not like when we watch TV and someone's talking to us for 10 seconds and then the kid finally looks up, huh? You were talking to me? You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
We've all
That's one
experienced
thing
that.
I would be remiss if we didn't mention is that podcasts work wonders for getting chores done with kids.
Yes.
Yeah, they
They pair well.
Yes,
And
it's the same.
parents.
Yes, and me too. Yes. Yes, absolutely. I have to have a podcast in to get to
Yeah.
focus enough to get
I
stuff
had
done.
a funny little like marketing idea where I wanted to tell parents stop being selfish and keeping podcasts to yourself, because there's so many adults out there, we can't get through a drive doing the dishes, waking up without, engaging our brains and listening to something. And it's the same for kids, like even more so. Maybe they just crave information, they crave stimulation, they crave learning. And that's one thing. Now that I've seen my son, who was, 5, 6 when we started listening, who's now 14, sadly, we don't have enough content yet in KidsPod. Hopefully soon. We'll have more teen and tween content that they can stay in the app or in a semi-safe place until we feel confident, that they can navigate Spotify without. Some kids are fine at 10, some kids are fine at 12, but I would feel more comfortable for a little bit. But those listening has become part of his routine and something that he turns to even without me prompting him. So now that he's doing the dishes, mowing the lawn, things like that, he just automatically goes and grabs his earbuds. And he's been able to find, things he's interested in, communities he's interested in. Like he's really into Dungeons and Dragons, for example. And while he has friends here, he's able to tap into like a whole universe of that through podcasts that he can't even get through any other medium, really. So it's been really cool to see how this isn't giving your child the gift of podcasts and listening and building these habits is going to serve them through into their adulthood. And I think that's really neat.
Yeah, to me, I think it's one of the greatest multisensory activities because you can listen and play. If they're kids, play with their hands, look around. They're using so many senses, but then even for our older kids who are now using them while they're doing chores or other things, using multiple senses, I think is so beneficial in just integrating, I mean, you obviously know way more than me, but I have found it very beneficial as a parent, being able to utilize as many senses as possible while learning.
Absolutely. And I just am so enthralled with the podcasting community. I think podcasting changes lives. I'm a big proponent, and I absolutely love the work that you are both doing to make sure that we, as you said, Jess, we're not selfish. We're not gatekeeping this amazing medium. We're sharing it with our kids in a safe way, in a responsible way, so that they have access to this amazing medium and way to learn and connect and broaden their horizons. So I'm just so excited that you were both on the show today to share this with our listeners. Everybody go to KidsPod. Tell listeners what's the best way to connect with you and to get their kids started on this journey if they haven't
so
already.
You can search for us in the App Store. That's the easiest way. Just type in KidsPod. I thought for about 10 seconds before I named KidsPod, I just said, that's what I searched into. That's what I typed into the search bar when I was looking for a podcast app for kids, and nothing came up. And so And I was tired of having to remember, I think at the time, maybe it's less so, all the kids brands were like hard to remember names. Do you kind of remember? They're all like Lily and Jack or Jack and Aiden or like just, or weird names that I could never recall. And so I was like, I just want it to be called KidsPod because then it's so easy to remember. You can just type that in. You can find us at kidspod.app on our website, which we have a great blog that has all of this information we shared and more. Rachel does amazing seasonal playlists on the app and we share them on our blog. So if we really want to take all that legwork out for you, like Rachel's an amazing curator and really an expert at it. So let us do the work for you for sure. You can also follow us on Instagram at kidspod.app as well. And TikTok, we're trying to get better at TikTok. We're true millennial moms who watch TikTok 2 weeks later on Instagram.
Yeah,
so
it's hard.
We're trying. But yeah, those are all the ways. And we'll share a coupon code with you guys. So maybe in the show notes or something. I don't have that right now, but we'll get that for you guys.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That is so generous.
The app is free. Just if you want additional app features like favorites library or color along mode or various app features, that's what the subscription's for.
Awesome. Well, I know right after I met you, Jess, I subscribed and we have incorporated this into our routine and I need to get it get it together and get What's Up Young Authors on because I haven't done that yet. That's my fault. So I need to send you the submission for that because we're so excited to potentially be a part of this community of children's podcasts reaching people. So we will definitely, Mom will get her act together and get that done.
Yeah, no worries. No apologies.
Yes, please. Just email me. I will add it to the library.
I also want to
just
make sure I give a huge shout out to the actual kid podcasters. We are simply the middlemen. We just try to, gather all that's out there and make it easy for everyone, but they are the real heroes. And so many of them are doing it out of passion, out of just this love of sharing and creating for children. And, we wouldn't be here without them, obviously. And so also just encourage people to do all they can to support these creators as well.
Jess and Rachel, thank you so much for being here and sharing more about KidsPod with me and our listeners. Everyone, I recommend you go and check it out and sign up. And as they said, that coupon code will be in the show notes as well as all of this information. So don't worry if you're driving, you don't need to stop to write it down. We will make sure that it's there and accessible to you when you come to your location and you're in a safe space. Thank you so much for being here, ladies. I so appreciate you taking the time to share this with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was a great conversation. We'll talk about podcasts anytime. It's our passion.
And it's our passion here too at Talks with Dr. Shafer. Thank you so much to our storytellers for being here. And as we said before, please make sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss any of the amazing episodes we have coming up with other amazing guests, as well as our solo episodes where we work through some really challenging things to help you reclaim your story and build your most beautiful future. Until next time, stay safe and take care. I'll talk to you soon.